So thanks everyone for joining us today for a presentation about the Ottawa Renewable Energy Co-operative and community-owned renewable energy. Thrilled and a big thanks to Janet Mark Wallace for helping organize this. Janet's of course a longtime member of OREC, so this will be an old hat for her, but happy to be able to share this information with others who are interested. I'm just going to do a sort of overview of OREC, the work we've done to date, a little bit about where we're headed, and we'll be speaking specifically about the investment opportunities we have available at this point in time. And of course, I'll open it up to questions after that and discussion. So you are able to use the chat if you'd like to ask questions throughout the session. We have our former board member and former president, Dick Bacher, on the line with us as well, able to address some of those as we go forward. So with that said, the Ottawa Renewable Energy Co-operative has been around for some time, since 2010, when Dick actually and four other individuals got together and incorporated the cooperative. Since then, we've certainly grown in leaps and bounds, and we'll talk a bit about that shortly. But really, I think the underpinning ideology or underpinning mission behind OREC was to allow individuals in first Ottawa and Eastern Ontario, and now even a bit more broadly, to connect with both renewable energy projects that they wanted to see happen in their communities, but even beyond that, also with a chance to be co-owners and co-investors in these kinds of projects. Really striving to create a vehicle that allows community energy dollars and the electrons themselves, and of course the benefits more broadly speaking, to remain local as much as possible, and to sort of shift the overall landscape of the energy system in Ontario. So that is the through line in all the work that we do. We are a for-profit cooperative. We're regulated under the Cooperative Corporations Act provincially, as well as a number of other provincial regulatory bodies, FSRA listed there, as well as various organizations that oversee the regulation of the electricity system more broadly in the province as well. Since that time in 2010, we've, as I said, accomplished quite a bit. We've grown our membership to over 800 members just as of last week, which was a milestone we were all quite happy to achieve. All of these individuals were, at least at some point in time, and most are still to this day, residents, of Ottawa and East Ontario. For reference, we sort of define Eastern Ontario as the border with Quebec in the east and the Kingston area of Frontenac County in the west, and everywhere in between. And so we've historically focused on that, but as you'll hear shortly, we certainly are expanding slightly as time goes on. The through line, as I mentioned, with all these individuals, all these members, is they're in their own way passionate about solving the climate crisis, and doing so through innovative community ownership models like the cooperative. Worth mentioning, talking about investment, shortly, only about half of these individuals have invested, and so it's worth noting that it's by no way is it required that individuals invest. We certainly welcome any and all members, because growing our numbers does mean a lot for us in terms of the advocacy work we do, and a lot of the other sort of work that the cooperative takes on. So since 2010, we've developed 21 solar projects. 18 of these were under the FAIR program, which was part of the Green Energy Act, which existed in Ontario between 2009 and 2018. The feed-in tariff program was very much well set up for cooperatives like ours to participate in, but also for organizations like municipalities, Indigenous communities, private individuals, as well as private organizations to participate and to capture really the development of the renewable energy sector in the province. It borrowed a great deal from similar feed-in tariff programs that have existed in other parts of the world, namely, Germany, especially northern parts of Germany, Denmark, and other countries in Europe, as well as certain of the United States, although less prevalent there. And I think, just to take a quick pause to speak about the program, I think it definitely did accomplish that development, right? We've seen, certain ebbs and flows of, the renewable energy sector in the province of Ontario, insofar as it is, politically controlled, by the provincial administration of the day. However, we have seen a remarkable, growth of both installation companies, engineering companies, various other organizations associated with the industry, as well as just sheer number of renewable energy installations and development, which are playing an increasingly important role in our renewable energy and our energy mix, broadly speaking, to this day. So 18 of our projects hold those contracts, as well as the 2 new projects that we'll be talking about shortly. The 3 other projects, solar rooftop projects that we have, are what are under the sort of net metering contract setup. So net metering simply means the energy produced by the projects themselves is consumed by the host facility. So in our case, as you do with 2 Ottawa area high schools within the French Catholic School Board, as well as the pictured here on the left, the Canadian Museum of Science and Technology. We anticipate net metering to be the setup or the sort of contractual arrangement going forward, as well as iterations of net metering, such as community solar gardens, virtual net metering, and other things along those lines, which allow, we believe, more accessibility and greater participation from community members like yourselves to get involved in renewable energy development and renewable energy projects, as well as sourcing renewable energy directly for your homes to that end. Just to return quickly to the feed-in tariff contracts, these have guaranteed rates of per kilowatt hour produced that are backed by the province of Ontario. The contracts are with the independent electricity systems operator. In the case of the net metering projects, those contracts are between OREC and the facility hosts. But are all long-term contracts with what we like to think are very stable counterparties. Of those 21 solar projects, we are proud to say all of our capital contributions, which are at times 100%. Some of our projects are jointly owned with other organizations or individuals, and all of our money has come exclusively from membership, from our organization directly. So we've raised $8 million to date, and that number continues to increase, of course, as time goes on, as well as the amount of returns, the dollar returns that we've paid to investors. So we're $2 million was sort of the last count, and of course that number is increasing every year. A little bit of a snapshot about how our organization works, very much on a sort of cyclical basis in many ways. And during the feed-in tariff sort of era of renewable energy, this was very much a repeating process. Now less so, but of course we've found very positive channels to continue to operate under as time has gone on. So ultimately, our group is always on the lookout for new project development opportunities, as well as potentially the acquisition of existing projects to bring them under community ownership, community control. But the staff, the board, members within the membership more broadly are always looking for chances to develop renewable energy. As I mentioned, we've spent a lot of time in the solar photovoltaic space, but we are continuing to be open to other opportunities. And we work with, as I mentioned earlier, fairly stable counterparties. So institutions, crown corporations, as in the case of the Museum of Science and Technology, as well as schools, municipalities even, and private businesses which have longevity. And we do fairly rigorous due diligence to ensure that longevity is something we're confident in. Once we identify projects and really price them out, be it for purchase or for development, this is when we develop our own investment products, our own investment securities for sale to our members. So we develop these products ourselves. They are vetted very rigorously by the Financial Services Regulatory Authority, which is a branch of the provincial government. And the purpose of this is to ensure that our numbers are correct, our assumptions are accurate. We're acknowledging the risks that are associated with our projects, and we do our best to be extremely transparent with our members, of course. As we offer opportunities for individuals to invest, this is where we pool essentially that community capital to be able to then put in these projects. Revenues for our investors, it comes from the electricity, the sale of electricity, either directly to the grid, or in the case of net metering projects, to the counterparties themselves. And this is all part of moving the sort of Ontario region, broadly speaking, to 100% renewable energy landscape, which is really the mission that continues to drive OREC to this day. Profits are then returned to investors in the form of capital repayment, as well as interest payments or dividends, as the case may be. And I'll talk a little bit more specifically about the difference in those and the kinds of investment products we've offered and will be offering and are offering, right now. Taking a moment to sort of speak about membership. Membership is open to anyone living in Eastern Ontario. And this is something we've continued to expand as time has gone on. In our earliest days, OREC members were all from the City of Ottawa area, but we have recognized the opportunity and developed projects in areas outside of the city. And so, and in very much keeping with our principles of local ownership, have expanded our membership catchment area as well to be reflective of that. We are now continuing to expand that catchment area to include areas like the counties listed there, and that'll make a bit more sense when I talk about the new projects that we're bringing into the fold. Membership requires a purchase of a membership share, as is the case with most cooperatives, and it is a one-time purchase of $100. Beyond the opportunity to invest, membership is really fundamental to all cooperatives, and this is the chance to add your voice to the renewable energy transition. Broadly speaking, we'll talk in a few moments about the advocacy work that OREC does and has been very effective in over the years. But also fundamental to our work is, of course, the one member, one vote principle that guides all cooperatives internationally. We've certainly adhered to this over the years. And what this really means is that it doesn't matter what any one individual has invested in the cooperative or if they've invested at all. If you hold that membership share, you have the same amount of say as anyone else in the direction of the cooperative, in the election of the board of directors, and in other decisions critical to the cooperative's mission and mandate. And so this is really a democratic governance model, and one we think has a very important part to play in the continued development of the renewable energy sector in Ontario and the energy space more broadly speaking. There is, of course, also the opportunity for individuals to get directly involved in the cooperative through board of director roles, as well as other technical and sort of team roles that we've offered in the past. And we've certainly have benefited immensely from the participation of our members over the years. And they've really helped us develop our organization, get us to the point we are now. Speaking briefly about sort of the evolution of the grid, and again, sort of talking to the underpinning, sort of ideas behind OREC. We've seen the energy grid really evolve quite a bit over certainly the last 10 years, and even to an extent the past 20, 25 years. And really this hinges upon a transition from centralized to rigid energy systems to one that is more distributed, largely driven by renewable energy, and one that is much more sort of modular to an extent and flexible. And folks will have heard of things like smart grids, and we definitely think that those play a really important role going forward. But ultimately, the renewable energy plus storage, to the extent that it is available and plays a role, is really driving this transition. As mentioned earlier, the work that our cooperative has done is large. A great deal of it is inevitably in the advocacy space. As I mentioned, the energy sector is very much a politicized one in Ontario. And so we recognize our role as an organization to be able to have conversations, meaningful conversations with elected officials, bureaucrats, and regulatory bodies to be able to drive what we think is sort of the future of the energy sector, and to realize the kinds of things that our members are advocating for as well. And we do that on their behalf. Dick?
Aaron, yeah, if I could just interject for a moment. We can't overemphasize the fact that the electricity grid that we're using in Ontario now, and most of the world has used for the last 100 years, is a very Stalinist model of a big power plant far away, running through a long transmission line and then through a distribution network to millions of end customers. In Ontario, 60% of our power comes from 3 nuclear facilities with, I think, 11 turbines, Bruce, Darlington, and Pickering. And that has become more and more centralized as we got rid of the coal. The future, we believe, and most of the people in the industry believe, is a distributed, renewable-based, but distributed power system where the generation is closer to the consumption. In Ottawa today, we have 50 to 70,000 people living in Barrhaven who didn't exist there 15 years ago. There has been no major change just to the grid. They've just been pushing power into that area. If you want to throw the Ottawa network out, toss a Molotov cocktail to the Hawthorne facility, 75% of the power, more than almost 80% of the power coming into Ottawa comes through that one facility, which connects to Quebec and Toronto. There's no way we can carry forward with such a centralized power grid with all the new electric things that are coming. So the ethos of OREC and Co-Energy has been that if someone can see a wind turbine or a solar system, they should be able to own it or benefit directly from it, because it looks better if you are earning from it than if it's owned by a distant pension fund or a bank in Germany. Secondly, if the power assets, the jobs, and the electrons are all locally focused, there's going to be more support for it. And thirdly, if the politicians and media think of energy in that way, there will be a lot more support for the energy transition we have to go through. And that's what a lot of our time has been on the advocacy side, is to get the politicians, the regulators, and the financial institutions and regulators to understand the importance politically and technically and efficiently for local distributed power. Solar, wind, biomass, biogas, all the different types. And nuclear is as centralized as 150 wind turbines in one location. They're both big central power plants, and they each have their advantages and disadvantages, but the major disadvantages of all centralized power plants is you have to ship the power a long way, and almost 50% of your power bill is distribution and other ancillary services. The actual electricity is relatively small, and that has to change. If we go to big central power, central nuclear, central wind, it's all reinforcing the fact that we have to pay more and more for long distribution with line loss, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not going to say any more about that because it'll go on, but that is the core of what's happening in the power system today everywhere in the world, and Ontario is lagging behind under the present ideology that the system operates under. So I'll pass it back to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Dick. No, really valuable insight, and we've certainly seen changes and to an extent some frustration, I would say, among our organization. We've seen other jurisdictions, other states or provinces or countries take really big strides with respect to facilitating renewable energy. Not as much as we like. It's never at the pace that we would like here in Ontario, but I think we will obviously see those changes come to pass in due time. So moving along, just to sort of speak briefly to the project portfolio OREC currently holds, and I mention this importantly because when investing in OREC, you are not just investing in the projects that that we're raising against at this particular moment in time. You're certainly investing in the portfolio as a whole, and your returns as such are generated from the generation and the revenues that come from the whole portfolio. As I mentioned, 21 solar projects and soon to be 23 projects in total, with 2 new wind energy projects. So I'll just sort of go through a few projects that we have in our portfolio, and just to share with you sort of the diversity of the kinds of projects that we have in terms of scale, in terms of technology types, in terms of locations. So we've worked with a variety of different organizations over the years. And we're very proud to have all of those as very sort of positive partners, very positive counterparties. We've really had tremendous amount of success in finding partners that align very much with the values of our cooperative as a whole. And we're also able to bring them ancillary benefits like, in the case of many of these FIT projects, lease revenues for the space of their roof, or as you can see in this project, the land. In this case, the project is the land itself is owned by the municipality of Alfred. So being able to contribute to that in a meaningful way is very valuable for us. We're also working with Kiwewin First Nation on this project, as well as another First Nation, Taikomu First Nation, on another project located in Hawkesbury that is very similar to this one pictured here. All of these projects have unique aspects to them. As I mentioned, diversity of size, diversity of technology type. As you saw, they were in the previously pictured. Let's jump back for a moment. These are ground mount systems using single access trackers, which allow the panels to track and be reflective of the trajectory of the sun over the course of the day to maximize production. And then more traditional sort of rooftop solar projects like this one with the French Public School Board. And this one that you've seen already, but an important one for us for a bunch of different reasons, namely working with Canadian Museum of Science and Technology was something that Dick and many of our early members and board members began discussions with almost a decade ago. And so being able to have the pieces come together in a way that allowed us to take on this project was really meaningful. Also, as I mentioned, a Crown corporation, federal Crown corporation. And so this provides us with a lot of leverage, I think, talking to policymakers, decision makers, bureaucrats as well, to demonstrate the role that community capital can play in transitioning federal building portfolios, for example, to a renewable energy future. Finally, I mentioned this project for a couple of reasons. It not only was it a way for us to develop net metering assets with the French Catholic School Board, who we'd worked with on a number of different occasions. I think we have four feed-in tariff projects with them as well. We have another project just like this one pictured that was also brought online in 2020 with the Paul Desmarais High School in Stittsville, and playing really valuable roles, as Dick mentioned, as we continue to discuss with regulators and others the role of renewable energy in so far as it can relieve stress on the grid as well as reduce emissions. So an important role for our projects is demonstrating the capacity they have to do that kind of stress relieving or grid capacity relieving in the Ottawa area. Speaking now about the new projects that we are bringing into our portfolio, OREC is, I think, tremendously excited, reflected in our membership as well as in our board members, to be entering into the wind energy space. This is something we've been certainly thinking about for a long time, and opportunity presented itself with these 2 wind turbines that are built out and have been existing for a number of years, located in southwestern Ontario, so certainly geographically outside of our original sort of catchment area. They're located along the shore of Lake Huron, but exciting for a couple of reasons. Important to mention, we are working with Enerforge, a division of Oshawa Power and Utilities Corporation, sort of the Hydro Ottawa of the Oshawa area, and Enerforge is a really really exciting counterparty in this project because they are very enthusiastic about the pursuit of renewable energy development and acquisition of existing projects. So very much in line, as I say, from a values perspective with OREC, in recognizing that the future of energy is distributed, is renewable, and is to an extent community owned as well. They were extremely excited for us to be able to bring that community ownership aspect to these projects, and we certainly are excited about potential future collaboration with them down the line. To finance this acquisition, we're seeking to raise $1.3 million. That number could change based on various aspects and final sales, but at this point, we are on track to sort of hit that target by the end of July. So the clock is ticking to an extent. We always encourage folks to act quickly if they're able to, and we'll talk a bit about what specifically is available for investment. But briefly, to speak about the two turbines in particular, so these are individual turbines located. One is located in Zurich, Ontario, as you can see, and it's hosted by a local landowner, local farmer. It was connected to the grid in 2010, so has been operational for going on 11 years now. Has a tremendous track record of production. I believe it's achieved between 97 and 99% of expected production just over the years. So very, very impressive figures in that respect. It employs an Enercon direct drive turbine. And I mention this because folks who are familiar with the wind energy sector will undoubtedly recognize the Enercon name. It is very much a leader in wind energy manufacturing. It's a German company. As Dick likes to say, these turbines were built for the northern German countryside, where wind energy is extremely prevalent, is extremely strong, and so these are really built to that standard. And southwestern Ontario is not quite as doesn't have quite the wind potential as that part of Europe, but it is all to say that these turbines are very much built for the long run, built to accommodate all kinds of different weather considerations. The other project is just up the way in Tiverton, Ontario, which for folks who maybe know is just outside of the Bruce nuclear power plant. So we certainly like those optics to an extent, with keeping in mind what we talked about earlier with respect to the modernizing and changing electricity grid. A larger turbine, 2.3 megawatts, so significant by standards of the day, 2014 when it was brought online. Although of course now we are seeing 10 megawatt wind turbines and large systems being brought online. But for us as cooperative, very much an appropriate size. These two turbines very much appropriately sized assets for us to manage, for us to understand what it is like to manage wind assets. We have a lot of wind expertise on our board of directors and individuals who themselves are part of ownership groups of other wind turbines, and so we are very familiar with the process. But of course, being our first that we are formally bringing into our own project portfolio, we think these are really good first step. To speak briefly about why we're stepping into wind and also stepping outside of Eastern Ontario, there's a couple of reasons. As I mentioned, already a couple of times, these two turbines, as well as the counterparty in Enerforge, make this a very, I think, savvy transition for OREC. It's very easy for us to enter into this ownership structure with Enerforge, to work with them, a group that has a very extensive, growing renewable energy portfolio, and one that also has a lot of, I would say, clout and carries a lot of weight with regulators. So it also provides us with a real opportunity to increase our lobbying efforts, our conversations with elected officials at various levels and regulators to achieve that kind of change that we continue to strive for. Also, the fact that these are both existing assets really helps de-risk them significantly. Construction risk is obviously a reality with any development project of many different kinds, and the renewable energy sector is no different. So having these projects be up and running is obviously important. With that said, our group continues to strive and really place, I would say, a priority upon additional renewable energy generation capacity, right? Our mandate is to help the overall transition to renewable energy. And so we continue to place a focus upon new projects where and when possible. To that end, it's worth noting that, Dick and I have sort of addressed it, maybe danced around it a little bit. This current government has certainly placed a degree of uncertainty, if I can put it that way, in the renewable energy sector. Not so much in the existing projects. As I say, all of these projects, these 2 projects, as well as the other 18 that I mentioned earlier, have those feed-in tariff contracts, which are not in any way affected by the Ford government's decisions. But certainly a degree of uncertainty as far as what the new project opportunities will look like and how they will be structured contractually, technologically, and sort of other factors. So this was a good opportunity for us to continue to offer our members the chance to invest in renewable energy while we continue to seek out new development opportunities. So to speak now to the current investment options, at this point in time, we do have an offering that has been approved by the Financial Services Regulatory Authority. And as I mentioned, this is a government entity that oversees all kinds of different financial sort of securities offerings, both of cooperatives as well as private organizations. And they do a very diligent job in reviewing all of our math, all of our assumptions as we go forward. Right now, the OREC board is limiting our offering to, or current sort of offering to, Class B preference shares. These are shares that were really designed with the current capital needs of the organization in mind. So they have a 15-year term. They are RSP and TFSA eligible. They're also eligible to be held in an unregistered manner. And they earn an annual dividend, which is declared by the OREC board of directors, obviously every year. It is anticipated that the first dividend for Class B shareholders will be in December 2022, so not for another year. And the reason for that is our fiscal year runs from September 1st through to August 31st, and these shares will likely not be declared and issued by the board until later in July. And as a result of that, only a month will have passed by the time we end our fiscal year and declare our dividend based on that year's performance. And so the board isn't anticipating that these shares will have earned enough to earn a dividend, essentially. Capital return for these shares begins in year 3, and it occurs in a piecewise manner. Essentially, every year between year 3 and year 15, individuals will receive an equal portion of their initial capital investment. So 1/12 essentially of their capital investment alongside their annual dividend. And the dividend is earned on the declining balance of those shareholdings. We are targeting an annual dividend with Class B shares as well as existing Class A shares, it's worth mentioning, of 3.5% to 4%. I have to say it's not a guarantee by any means of what, if any, the dividend rate will be. However, our financial modeling, our cash flow analyses are demonstrating that this is very much achievable with these new projects and the revenues that are coming in immediately. Sometimes we raise capital and then build out new projects, and of course there's a delay before those projects are earning revenues because they have to be built out, connected to the grid, all the paperwork and this kind of thing that needs to be done. These are of course existing projects, so the return is immediate. The minimum investments for these Class B shares are $2,500 for non-registered. So if you choose to hold these outside of an RSP or TFSA, the minimum is $2,500. For RSP and TFSA, as you can see, is $5,000. And I'll talk a bit about those options now. Cooperative shares like ours are unique. So not many, I will say, financial institutions are able to hold them. We work with 2 providers, and primarily with the first you see there, the Canadian Workers Cooperative Federation, or CWCF, to hold our shares in trust within self-directed RSP and TFSA accounts in our members' names. So the process through which folks can invest in these kinds of accounts, it requires you to actually open an RSP or TFSA with CWCF. This is a fairly easy process, but of course, It may mean you have more than one of these accounts on at the go, which is totally permitted. But unfortunately, we aren't able to have our shares held within existing RSPs or TFSAs with groups like, banks or credit unions for that matter. We've worked with CWCF since 2012, and they've really provided us with incredibly valuable services for our members to invest in these kinds of accounts. There's different ways that you can capitalize these investments in RSP or TFSA. The first is, of course, through new contribution. So, cutting a check as a new, registered contribution, which will count towards your 2021 tax year. And our CWCF issues, tax statements every year to make sure that's reflected on your annual, tax filings. There is, of course, also the opportunity to transfer funds from an existing RSP or TFSA from, your bank or your credit union, as the case may be. And that's a very popular method for folks where they have the funds available for investment, and it's simply a transfer. And there's paperwork to allow that to happen within the packages that we are able to send out for folks interested in this option. So those are the ways in which folks can invest. Just worth mentioning, for the unregistered option, it's much more straightforward to an extent. It's simply between the cooperative and the member investor. It's a simple subscription form, and we send you a share certificate, depicting the shareholdings that you invest in, and we issue annual investor statements to all shareholders, regardless of when they invested and what shares they hold, and that will show you what you've earned on the year, as well as what you have sort of in remaining balance. We also, for unregistered shareholders, we issue T5 statements alongside our accounting firm that we work with. And so you will receive that tax information because dividends and returns on unregistered shares are, of course, taxable. So that is the conclusion of the formal presentation for this. I'm happy to open it up to questions, comments from the group that we have with us today that may be helpful for folks watching this in the future to sort of wrap their head around things. Yeah, so without further ado, I'll invite folks who might have questions to ask away, and we'll go from there.
Aaron, I do have a question. In regards to the return of capital that begins after year 3 with the preference-free shares, like if it's within an RRSP, so does it sort of sit there like sheltered in this CWCF account, but it's no longer earning interest? And it's available, I suppose it would be then available to reinvest in a new share offering. Is that?
Yeah, correct. That's correct, Janet. So it is worth mentioning, and I should have mentioned it earlier, a couple things actually about registered investments with CWCF in particular. You're correct in that all dividends as well as capital return go back into the registered account directly, and this is what allows them to not be taxed. So they go directly into that, and they sit as uninvested cash in those accounts. So they are, as you point out, not earning returns. This is something we're very conscious of, and with respect to that, we try to offer investment opportunities every year to allow folks to reinvest that capital, to put it to work. We also, I would say, the WCF works with a variety of different cooperatives across the country who have, of course, different eligibility for who can invest in them, based on maybe their geographical location, but there are a number of other organizations that work with CWCF, and so therefore provide investment opportunities at different times of the year for folks to put that capital to work. It's also worth noting, just before I forget, that registered investment opportunities, so that RSP or TFSA account comes with a $55 annual fee. So that comes out directly of your dividend when the dividend is issued. So CWCF charges that $55 annual fee. It's for that reason, as well as this sort of administrative process, that we have the $5,000 minimum investment rather than the $2,500 for unregistered. it's also a way of sort of minimizing the impact of that $5 as a percentage, if you will, of your annual returns, right? The larger the investment, the larger the dividend, and therefore the lesser percentage that $55 fee takes on in your annual returns. So that's what I would say about the registered option. And I don't know, Dick, if you wanted to add a thought.
Yeah,
about that.
I can address that. So I've invested my shares through CWCF. It's a $55 a year charge. There is no interest on cash that's sitting there, so I don't want my cash to sit there. You can transfer it out to another RSP, but I've left it there, and that's one of the reasons why we are trying so hard to have offerings every year. So the last 2 years we kind of been cold on that because for various reasons in the market, but and that money that sits in that offer in that CWCF account can also be applied to any other co-op that is registered with CWCF.
Yeah. I would say one final thought on that, Dick, and the option does exist for, of course, individuals to transfer that cash to another RSP.
Yes.
With say with another financial institution, which would potentially have more flexibility, more options available to invest that capital.
Yeah.
So that option exists as well. There are transfer out fees associated with that. I can't recall what they are exactly off the top of my head, but that option exists as well.
I can also say that the fees, while they're transparent and obvious, are the lowest fees I've ever seen in this area. CWCF is using the back office of, I think it's Concentra in Saskatoon, which provides the back office for all the credit unions across the country. So they're providing the retail side to Concentra. So they work with Concentra, which works with all the large credit unions across the country. So,
Aaron, just a question. The minimum investment or whatever investment you have, are they designated to a certain project? I wasn't sure of that this year, or is it just going to the pot and
that's right,
used to spread around?
Yeah, it's a great question, and happy to expand on it. We are raising capital, of course, right now against individual projects. However, the investments themselves go into the pot, as you say, right? So returns on those investments are generated by the portfolio as a whole. So in that sense, certainly seeking to de-risk the investments, because we have, as I mentioned, 21 solar projects up and running, already earning revenues. The 2 wind projects as well, already up and running, will be earning revenues for the cooperative as soon as that ownership is transferred. And on the whole, they're geographically distributed, technology type distribution. So the short answer to your question, yes, it goes into the pot and returns are generated by the whole portfolio rather than just the one project.
So is the pot used for the new stuff you're getting into then? Because all the other are operational and on the go? From earlier investments?
Yeah, so earlier investments are sort of, we've already spent that capital on new project development. We set aside a portion of our revenues every year for preventative, if there's the need for repairs, for replacement, essentially a reserve fund. But on the whole, majority of revenues every year are being returned to investors, Class A preference shareholders who have invested with us in the past, as well as issued investment notes historically as well. But with respect to your question, certainly we always sort of raise against that set of projects, but certainly returns are all in the same sort of bundle, if I will.
So on your slide there, the Class B preferred shares, that included the non-registered.
Sorry, that's us.
That included the non-registered stuff. What about the Class A shares?
The Class A shares are. I'll just interject. The Class A shares are how we were raising for the 20-year FIT contracts when they were 20 years. These 2 projects are into the 20 years. Yeah. So the Class A attributes are 20-year terms, capital repayment starting in year 6. So over the last 15 years, the capital is repaid. These projects are have 9 and 13 years left in their 20-year contract. So we can't do a Class A 20-year term.
Okay.
Right? So there is 11% of the revenue that's assumed to be post-FIT, but we have 9 and 13 years left in the FIT contract. So that's why we came out with a Class B share.
Okay.
Because
really,
the contract we're buying has a different parameter.
Yeah, and really just to reflect essentially the capital requirements of the cooperative at this point in time, it made sense to develop a new class of shares. Beyond that, I would also say that the board is always conscious of the longevity of our term, right, of our investment products. We're always seeking as much as possible to offer shorter term products because generally those are more popular among investors and among our members. However, to an extent, we, as Dick says, we sort of reflect the contract terms and the revenues that we know will be coming through with the design of our product.
Just on that though, the FIT contracts, the solar FIT contracts, they had, when we signed them, they had a 20-year contract. That's not the life of the technology. The solar panels on the roof will generally last 25 to 35 years or longer. The inverters will die at a certain stage. We know that, but that's a relatively small part of it. The wiring, the racking, and all of that can last forever, effectively, unless the roof has to be replaced or repaired. The wind turbines, we're expecting the existing turbines that have 9 and 13 years left on them to have,
14.
or 14, sorry, to have a longer life than that. And the beauty of the wind projects, this is a question somebody else asked in an earlier session, how do we compete against the big projects and the large consolidation that's happening? These two wind projects are on the distribution side of the grid. They're not on the transmission side. The nuclear power plant in Bruce, around the corner from our Tiverton site, all that power is going to Toronto. It doesn't help the Bruce Peninsula. It's being pushed straight to Toronto, and then from there to the rest of the province. The Tiverton site and the Zurich site are both feeding the local grid in the neighborhood. We don't realize that. Most people don't care. They just see power lines. But the big pylons that are, Ottawa has two lines coming in from Toronto, and we carry transmission through from Quebec to Toronto. Everything else has to be made inside the grid, right? So these are local on the distribution side. So they're not going to be constrained by excess on the transmission line to let other power flow down. The big central wind farms have the IESO has the ability to turn those turbines off. They won't turn our turbines off. Now, that's a small point, but it's a key point.
Viable.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
If the questions, happy to chat. I am going to stop the recording and we'll just, we can sort of